I remember the excitement I felt when I booked my vacation to a remote cabin in the woods. I had been working non-stop for months and needed a break. The idea of disconnecting from the world and spending some time in nature was exactly what I needed. Little did I know, my vacation would turn into a nightmare. When I arrived at the cabin, I was struck by its beauty. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by tall trees and a tranquil lake. It was the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of the city. I spent the first few days exploring the woods and relaxing by the lake. Everything seemed peaceful and quiet, just as I had hoped. But that all changed on the fourth night of my stay. I was awakened by a strange noise outside my cabin. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but the noise grew louder and more persistent. I tried to ignore it, but my curiosity got the best of me, and I went to investigate. As I stepped outside, I felt an eerie feeling wash over me. The woods were completely still, and the only sound was the noise that had woken me up. It sounded like something was scratching at the door of the cabin. I approached cautiously and peered through the window. I couldn't see anything, but the scratching continued. Suddenly, the scratching stopped, and I heard footsteps walking away from the cabin. I breathed a sigh of relief and went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, I decided to take a walk in the woods and clear my head. I followed a trail deep into the woods, and that's when I saw it. In the clearing, there was a small cabin, much like my own, but there was something off about it. The windows were boarded up, and there was a strange symbol carved into the door. I felt a chill run down my spine and decided to turn back. As I made my way back to my cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That night, I was woken up again by the scratching sound. This time, it was coming from inside the cabin. I tried to ignore it, but it grew louder and more persistent. I mustered up the courage to investigate, but what I found was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. The door to the cabin was open, and I could see something moving inside. I approached cautiously, but as I got closer, I saw that it was a figure dressed in a hooded robe. The figure turned to face me, and I saw that its eyes were completely black, like two voids in its skull. I tried to run, but I stumbled and fell, and the figure was upon me in an instant. I don't remember much after that. I woke up in the woods, battered and bruised, with no memory of how I got there. When I returned to the cabin, everything was as I had left it, except for one thing. The symbol that had been carved into the door of the strange cabin in the woods was now carved into my own door. I didn't stay another night in that cabin. I packed up my things and left as quickly as I could. I never spoke of what happened to anyone, but I know that something evil resides in those woods, something that preys on unsuspecting travelers, luring them in with the promise of peace and solitude, only to trap them in a nightmare from which there is no escape. In looking forward to my beach vacation for months, the idea of lounging in the sun, swimming in the ocean, and sipping on tropical drinks was all I could think about. But as soon as I arrived at the resort, I knew something was off. The hotel was old and run down, with peeling paint and flickering lights. The staff seemed uneasy, avoiding eye contact and giving short, clipped answers to my questions. I tried to brush off my unease, chalking it up to exhaustion from the long trip. The first few days of my vacation were relatively uneventful. I lounged on the beach, reading and soaking up the sun. But as the days passed, strange things started to happen. I woke up one morning to find sand all over my bed, even though I hadn't gone to the beach the day before. The next day, I found my clothes thrown all over the room, even though I had left them neatly folded on the dresser. I started to feel like I was being watched, and every time I turned around, I caught a glimpse of something moving out of the corner of my eye. One night, I woke up to a strange noise outside my window. I got up to investigate, but as soon as I stepped outside, I knew something was wrong. The beach was empty, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence. I heard a faint whispering coming from somewhere in the distance, but I couldn't make out what was being said. That's when I saw them, a group of figures, moving slowly towards me from the edge of the beach. They were tall and thin, with glowing eyes that seemed to stare into my soul. I froze, too scared to move. The figures started to move towards me, and I realized I had to get out of there. I ran back into my room, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. I leaned against the door, panting and gasping for air. The rest of my vacation was ruined. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I was too scared to leave my room. Every night, I heard strange noises outside, and every day, I felt like I was being followed. When I finally left the resort, I couldn't get away from the beach fast enough. I never found out what those figures were, but I knew that I never wanted to go back to that resort again. I had been looking forward to my vacation for months. I had booked a cozy cabin in the woods, hoping to escape the hustle and bustle of city life for a while. But as I drove deeper and deeper into the forest, I started to feel uneasy. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the road. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. I tried to shake off my nerves and enjoy the scenery, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. When I arrived at the cabin, I was relieved to find it was just as cozy as I had hoped. It was a small, one-room cabin with a fireplace and a loft bed. I settled in, feeling more relaxed already, but as the night wore on, I started to hear strange noises. There were footsteps outside the cabin, and I could hear something scratching at the door. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but the fear in my gut wouldn't go away. The next day, I decided to go for a hike. I wanted to explore the woods and see what was out there. But as I walked deeper into the forest, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The trees were dense and twisted, and there was no sign of civilization in sight. As I walked, I heard strange whispers coming from the trees. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the sound made my skin crawl. I started to feel like I was being followed, but every time I turned around, there was no one there. As the sun began to set, I realized I was lost. I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest looked different in the dark. The trees seemed to close in around me, and I felt like I was suffocating. That's when I saw it. A figure, looming in the shadows. It was tall and thin, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through me. I froze, too scared to move. The figure started to move towards me, and I realized I had to get out of there. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps growing closer and closer. Finally, I saw the cabin in the distance. I sprinted towards it, throwing open the door and slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, panting and gasping for air. The rest of my vacation was ruined. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I was too scared to leave the cabin. Every night, I heard strange noises outside, and every day, I felt like I was being followed. When I finally left the cabin, I couldn't get away from the woods fast enough. I never found out what was following me, but I knew that I never wanted to go back there again.